The invitation had arrived via text message with a photo of gleaming marble countertops. Housewarming at my new luxury apartment. Finally living somewhere that matches my success level. Hope you can make it, sis. Jake. I stared at the address on my phone screen while reviewing monthly reports from my property management company. 1247 Metropolitan Heights, Unit 3C. The address was familiar because I'd been reviewing the building's financials all morning. The luxury high-rise had been one of my more challenging acquisitions, a distressed property I'd purchased for $34 million 2 years ago after the previous owner defaulted during the market downturn. My stepbrother Jake, who'd spent the last 5 years telling anyone who'd listen that I was a minimum wage failure, was throwing his housewarming party at a building I owned. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so painful. Jake had been part of my family for 12 years, ever since Mom married his father when I was 16. In all that time he'd never once asked about my actual career or income. He'd simply assumed that because I lived modestly and drove a practical car, I must be struggling financially. What Jake didn't know was that his failure of a stepsister had quietly built a real estate empire worth $156 million over the past decade. While he'd been climbing the corporate ladder at a mid-tier marketing firm, I'd been strategically acquiring undervalued properties, renovating them, and creating a portfolio of high-end residential and commercial spaces. Metropolitan Heights had been a particularly satisfying purchase. The previous owners had over-leveraged during the boom years and couldn't service their debt when occupancy rates dropped. I'd bought it at a significant discount, invested $8 million in upgrades, and transformed it into one of the city's most desirable luxury residential buildings. The building now commanded premium rents and maintained a 97% occupancy rate. Jake's unit, a corner apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and city views, rented for $4,200 per month. I decided to attend the housewarming party, partly out of curiosity and partly because I hadn't seen that side of my family in several months. Jake had been increasingly distant as his career progressed, making it clear that he considered my presence at family gatherings somewhat embarrassing. The party was scheduled for Saturday evening, and I arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple black dress and carrying a modest housewarming gift. The lobby of Metropolitan Heights was impressive marble floors, contemporary lighting, and a concierge desk I'd personally approved during the renovation. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, noting the quality of the finishes and the quiet efficiency of the building systems I'd invested so heavily in upgrading. When the doors opened on Jake's floor, I could hear music and conversation coming from Unit 3C. The apartment was packed with Jake's colleagues from the marketing firm, along with several family members I recognized. The space looked exactly as I'd expected when I'd reviewed the floor plans: open-concept living with premium appliances, hardwood floors and those impressive city views. Jake greeted me at the door with an expression that mixed surprise with mild embarrassment. "Emma, he actually came. I wasn't sure." He gestured vaguely at the elegant surroundings. "I mean, I know this kind of place isn't really your scene." "It's lovely, Jake. Congratulations on the new apartment." "Thanks. Yeah, I finally made it to a place that matches my income level, you know? It feels good to live somewhere that reflects actual success." The comment stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "It's certainly impressive." Jake led me into the living room, where about 30 people were mingling with wine glasses and catered appetizers. I recognized several family members: my stepdad Robert, Jake's sister Kelly, and a few cousins from both sides of our blended family. "Everyone, you remember my stepsister Emma," Jake announced to the group. "She managed to make it tonight despite her busy work schedule." The way he said busy work schedule made it clear he was referring to what he assumed was my minimum wage job. Several people glanced at me with expressions that mixed politeness with pity. "What a nice surprise," said Kelly, Jake's sister who worked in finance. "We don't usually see you at events in this part of town." "I manage," I replied simply. Over the next hour I circulated through the party, listening to conversations about career achievements, salary increases, and the challenges of living at this level. Multiple people made comments about how expensive the neighborhood was, how exclusive the building had become, and how fortunate Jake was to be able to afford such luxury. The building's rental rates were mentioned several times, always in tones of impressed admiration. $4,200 a month for a one-bedroom, someone marveled. That's more than some people make in 3 months. Jake basked in the attention, clearly enjoying his role as the successful family member who'd achieved the lifestyle everyone aspired to. He gave impromptu tours of the apartment, highlighting the premium appliances, the marble bathroom and the spectacular view. This is what happens when you work hard and make smart career moves, he told one group. You earn the right to live in places like this. I found myself standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights, when my stepdad Robert approached me. Beautiful view, isn't it? He said. It really is. Jake's done well for himself. This place must cost a fortune. I'm sure it does. It makes me proud to see him achieving this kind of success. You know, Emma, you might want to think about what Jake's done here. Maybe it would inspire you to aim a little higher in your own career. The suggestion was delivered kindly, but it carried the clear implication that I needed inspiration to achieve what Jake had accomplished. I'll definitely consider that, I said. As the evening progressed, the comments became less subtle. During Jake's toast to making it in the big city, he made several references to family members who understand what success looks like versus those who were still figuring things out. The turning point came around 9:30 p.m., when Jake had clearly had several glasses of wine and decided to make an impromptu speech about achievement and aspiration. You know, he began, raising his glass, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate this milestone. This apartment represents more than just a place to live. It represents the reward for hard work, smart decisions, and refusing to settle for less than you deserve. General agreement and applause from the crowd. I look around this room and I see people who understand that success isn't just about what you do, it's about how you live, where you live, and the standards you set for yourself. More nodding and murmurs of approval. Some people are content to live modestly, work basic jobs, and never aspire to anything better. And that's fine. Someone has to work minimum wage, right? But the people in this room tonight are different. We're the ones who push ourselves to achieve more. I could feel eyes turning toward me and I realized that Jake was building up to something. My stepsister Emma is here tonight, and I want her to see what's possible when you refuse to settle. Emma, you've been working the same office job for years, living in that little apartment, driving that old car. But look around you, this is what success actually looks like. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as everyone realized Jake was essentially using me as a cautionary tale. You don't belong in nice places like this, he continued, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. Minimum wage workers like you ruin neighborhoods like this. They bring down property values and change the whole character of an area. Several people shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up to disagree. I mean, look at you, Jake gestured toward my simple dress and practical shoes. You can't even afford to dress appropriately for a place like this. It's embarrassing. Kelly nodded in agreement. Jake's right. There are standards to maintain in buildings like this. Robert, my own stepfather, remained silent. The truth is, Jake was really warming to his theme now. People like Emma don't understand what it takes to earn your way into luxury. They think they're entitled to be included in everything, but they haven't put in the work or made the sacrifices. The humiliation was overwhelming, but I maintained my composure. I set down my water glass and gathered my purse. You're absolutely right, Jake, I said quietly. I should go. Don't take it personally, Emma, he called after me as I headed for the door. Maybe this will motivate you to work harder and aim higher in life. I left without arguing, took the elevator down through my own building, walked past my own concierge desk, and drove home in my old car, which was actually a 2-year-old Honda Civic that I'd chosen for its reliability and fuel efficiency. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing the lease agreements for Metropolitan Heights. Jake's lease showed he'd signed a 12-month agreement 6 weeks ago, with first month last month, and security deposit totaling $12,600 upfront. His application showed a salary of $78,000 annually from Morrison Marketing Group, respectable, but hardly the fortune he'd been implying. I spent an hour reviewing the building's lease termination policies and tenant conduct guidelines. As the owner, I had broad discretion in tenant selection and retention, particularly for behavior that could affect the building's reputation or community atmosphere. The next morning, I called my property management company. Patricia, this is Emma Chin. I need you to handle a lease termination for Metropolitan Heights. Of course. Which unit and what's the reason? Unit 3C, tenant Jake Morrison. The reason is conduct inconsistent with building community standards. Should I schedule a formal review process? No, this is a direct owner decision. Please call the tenant this morning and inform him that his lease is terminated effective immediately. He has 30 days to vacate per the lease terms. I'll handle it personally. Any specific reason I should provide? Simply state that it's the building owner's decision and that the termination is final and non-negotiable. Understood. At 10:23 a.m. my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jake's number. Emma. His voice was frantic, panicked. The craziest thing just happened. The property management company called and said my lease is terminated. They said it's the building owner's decision. That's terrible, Jake. Did they give you a reason? They said something about conduct inconsistent with building standards, but that doesn't make any sense. I haven't done anything wrong. How strange. Did you try talking to someone in charge? I called back and demanded to speak with the building owner, but they said the owner doesn't take calls from tenants and the decision is final. That does seem harsh. Emma, I need to ask you something. You don't happen to know anyone in real estate, do you? Anyone who might be able to help me understand what's happening. The irony was exquisite. Jake was asking his minimum wage stepsister for help with a real estate problem at the building she owned. I might know someone who could provide information, I said carefully. Really? Could you ask them? I'm desperate here. I put down almost $13,000 on this place and I can't afford to lose it. I'll see what I can find out. What I actually did was call Patricia back. Please send Mr. Morrison written notice that his lease termination is due to public disparagement of other tenants based on perceived socioeconomic status. Include a copy of our community standards policy that prohibits discrimination and harassment. Should I mention the specific incident? State that building management received reports of the tenant making derogatory comments about other residents' financial status and declaring that certain people don't belong in the building. That's clear grounds for termination under our community standards clause. Exactly. 2 hours later, Jake called again. Emma, I got a letter from the building management company. They're saying I violated some community standards policy by discriminating against other tenants based on economic status. What kind of discrimination? They claim I made derogatory comments about residents' financial status and said people don't belong in the building. But Emma, I never said anything like that about other tenants. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. The only time I talked about people not belonging in nice places was when I was talking about. I could hear the realization hitting him. Oh God. Emma. Did someone report what I said about you at the party? What did you say about me, Jake? I said some things about minimum wage workers and people not belonging in luxury buildings. But Emma, you're not even a tenant. How could that violate their policy? Maybe because I was a guest in the building and your comments created a hostile environment? But that's not fair. I was just talking about economic realities. You said I don't belong in nice places. You said minimum wage workers like me ruin neighborhoods. You said I was embarrassing and couldn't afford to dress appropriately for the building. I didn't mean. Jake, what you meant was that you thought you were better than me because of money. And apparently, building management doesn't want tenants who treat people that way. Emma, please. Is there anything you can do? Anyone you can call? I'll lose everything, my deposit, my first and last month's rent, and I don't have anywhere else to go. I'll make some calls and see what I can find out. What I did was review Jake's financial situation more carefully. His lease application showed he was spending 65% of his gross income on rent alone. A financially precarious position that explained why losing the deposit would be so devastating. I also looked at his employment history and discovered that Morrison Marketing Group had been struggling financially. They'd laid off 30% of their workforce in the past year, and Jake's position wasn't particularly secure. The next day I called Jake back. I spoke with someone connected to the building management. What did they say? Can they reverse the termination? Jake, I need to ask you something first. Are you really making $78,000 a year? Why would you ask that? Because the person I spoke with mentioned that your lease approval was marginal based on your income verification. It's gross income, before taxes and everything. And your job at Morrison Marketing, how secure is that? Why are you asking all these questions? Because the building management wants to understand whether this was an isolated incident of poor judgment or part of a pattern of behavior. What do you mean? They're wondering if someone who publicly humiliates family members based on perceived financial status might also treat building staff, neighbors, or service workers inappropriately. I would never. Jake, you spent an entire evening telling 30 people that I was a failure because you thought I was poor. You said I didn't belong in nice places and that I was embarrassing to be around. But your family. That's different. Is it? Because from the building's perspective, if you'll treat family that way in public, how might you treat a maintenance worker or a delivery person or a neighbor who doesn't meet your standards? There was a long silence. Emma, what do I have to do to fix this? I don't know if you can fix it, Jake. The decision seems pretty final. There has to be something. A fine, a warning, community service, anything. The person I spoke with mentioned that the building owner is particularly sensitive to discrimination issues because they've worked hard to create an inclusive community environment. What does that mean? It means that exclusive doesn't have to mean exclusionary. You can have high standards without treating people badly based on assumptions about their background. I get it now. I understand. Can you please ask them to give me another chance? Jake, before I make any calls, I need you to understand something. Anything. This isn't really about the building policy. This is about the fact that you've spent years treating me like I was beneath you because you made assumptions about my financial situation. Emma, You never once asked about my actual job. You never inquired about my career goals or my life plans. You simply decided I was a failure and treated me accordingly. I was wrong. You were cruel. And you were cruel not just to me, but to anyone else you perceived as being lower on the economic ladder. I can change. Can you? Because this isn't just about apologizing to me. This is about fundamentally changing how you view and treat people. I will. I promise I will. Jake, let me ask you something. What do you think my actual job is? I thought you worked in some office doing administrative stuff. I own a real estate investment company with a portfolio worth $156 million. The silence that followed lasted nearly 2 minutes. That's not possible. I own Metropolitan Heights, Jake. I've owned it for 2 years. You've been paying rent to me. You own my building? I own your building along with 14 other properties in the metropolitan area. But you live in that small apartment, you drive that old car. I choose to live modestly because I learned early that how you treat people reveals your character, not your bank balance. Emma, I had no idea. That's exactly right. You had no idea, but you treated me badly anyway. What does that tell you about yourself? I'm an idiot. I'm a complete idiot. You're someone who judges people based on appearances and assumptions. And that's exactly why your lease is terminated. What do I do now? You find somewhere else to live and you think very carefully about the person you want to be. Emma, please. I'm begging you. I'll do anything, public apology, community service, whatever it takes. Jake, here's what I want you to understand. I didn't terminate your lease because I was angry about the party. I terminated it because your behavior demonstrated that you're not the kind of person I want living in my building. I can change. Maybe you can. But you'll need to prove that somewhere else. I can't afford to lose the deposit money. My savings are wiped out. Then maybe you'll understand what it feels like to be financially vulnerable and worry about being judged for it. Emma, we're family. Are we? Because family doesn't publicly humiliate each other for sport. The calls continued for 3 days, with Jake cycling through anger, bargaining, and desperation. He offered to pay additional fees, sign community service agreements, even make public apologies. But I'd made my decision based on a principle that went beyond our personal relationship. I wanted tenants who treated everyone with dignity, regardless of their perceived social or economic status. After a week, I received a call from my stepfather, Robert. Emma, I need to talk to you about Jake's situation. What about it? He says you own his building and you're evicting him because of what he said at the party. That's accurate. Emma, he's family. Surely you can work something out. Robert, were you there when Jake spent 10 minutes explaining to 30 people that I don't belong in nice places? He was drunk and he said some things he shouldn't have. He was expressing his genuine beliefs about me and people like me. The alcohol just made him honest about it. but to evict him from his home. Robert, let me ask you something. Why didn't you speak up at the party? What do you mean? When Jake was humiliating me in front of the whole family, why didn't you say anything? It was awkward. I didn't want to make a scene. But you're comfortable calling me now to ask for special treatment for the person who made that scene at my expense. Emma, that's not fair. Isn't it? You were fine with Jake treating me badly as long as it didn't affect him. Now that there are consequences, suddenly family loyalty matters. We all make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Robert. This was Jake revealing his true character. And you enabled it by staying silent. What do you want from us? I want you to understand that actions have consequences, and that family relationships should be based on love and respect, not assumptions about social status. So you're punishing the whole family? I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply choosing not to do business with someone who has demonstrated that he doesn't share my values. Emma, he's going to lose thousands of dollars. And I lost 12 years of family relationship to his condescension and disrespect. Over the following month, Jake moved out of Metropolitan Heights and found a smaller apartment in a less expensive neighborhood. The experience seemed to genuinely humble him, and he reached out several times to attempt apologies and rebuilding our relationship. But the most meaningful conversation came 6 months later, when he called with a different tone entirely. Emma, I've been thinking a lot about what happened and I wanted to call you. I'm listening. I want to apologize. Not because I want something from you, but because I owe you an apology. Go on. I spent years treating you badly because I made assumptions about your worth based on what I thought your financial situation was. That was wrong and it was cruel. Thank you for saying that. But Emma, I want you to know that I've learned something important. Even if you had been struggling financially, even if you had been working a minimum wage job, that wouldn't have made you less valuable as a person or less deserving of respect. The acknowledgement surprised me. What made you realize that? Living in my new neighborhood. Meeting people who work service jobs, who struggle to pay rent, who can't afford the things I took for granted. Realizing that they're good people with dignity and worth, regardless of their paychecks. That's a significant insight. Emma, I don't expect forgiveness and I'm not asking for any favors. I just wanted you to know that I understand now that I was wrong about everything. I appreciate that, Jake. And I wanted to ask you something. Would you be willing to have coffee sometime? Not to talk about business or money or any of that. Just to try to rebuild some kind of relationship as people. I considered the request carefully. Jake, I'm open to that. But I need you to understand that any relationship we rebuild will be based on who we are as people, not on what either of us can do for the other. I understand. And Emma? Yes. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Not because of the money, but because you built something meaningful while staying true to your values. Thank you. That means a lot. We did meet for coffee, and over time, we've been able to rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. Jake learned to see people as individuals rather than economic categories, and I learned that people can genuinely change when they're willing to examine their own behavior. Metropolitan Heights continues to be one of my most successful properties, with high occupancy rates and a strong community atmosphere. The incident with Jake reinforced my commitment to creating inclusive environments that welcome people based on character rather than just financial capacity. But the most important outcome was personal. I learned that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination is not anger or revenge, but the consistent application of principles that reflect the values you want to see in the world. Jake may have been right about one thing at his housewarming party. People like me don't belong in places where worth is measured only by wealth. We belong in places where worth is measured by how we treat each other. And fortunately, I own several of those places.